Welcome back, everybody, to a morning edition of Archaeology After Dark. I'm, of course, your host, Daniel Rhodes. My guest today is Dr. Tiffany Lindley. Tiffany, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk about archaeology at the Alamo.
And tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, I actually do have an Alabama connection. My family is from Alabama, and I went to the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. And that is where I got my interest really in archaeology. Growing up, I was always interested in ancient history. And I love, reading about Egypt and Greece, and I really enjoyed that ancient history, but never really thought about archaeology as a job until I started taking classes at the University of Alabama. And funny enough, I actually chose anthropology as my major going into college because I had done some research as a high school senior that those students who chose anthropology as their major were the least likely to change their major. And I thought to myself as an 18-year-old, how can I get out of college faster? Which now looking back as I, went all the way through for a PhD, I spent a lot of time in college. So that's how I started in archaeology, taking those classes in college. And I fell in love with it. And then from there, I got my master's degree at the University of Central Florida and worked in Caracol, Belize. So I was studying the ancient Maya, and those years that I spent at Central Florida with the anthropology department there, that really, really, I think, set the tone for my career. That's where I really began to develop my research interests, which really lie in cultural change and social memory, transitional periods throughout history. And I think it's no surprise that going on in the world at the time was the Occupy Wall Street, and very much about, I think I was influenced by those, what was going on in the world, right? And looking at, let's study the rest of society, not just those at the top, not just the 1%, not just the elite, which was a common theme in archaeology, decades ago. So that really developed my research interests. So then after my master's degree, I moved to Texas, San Antonio, and that's where I began my PhD and eventually led me to the Alamo.
So, how long have you been at the Alamo?
So I have been officially at the Alamo since 2021. And prior to that, I was working on a project at the Alamo with a CRM firm. So I started that project in 2019. So started that project in 2019. And then when a position became available at the Alamo for an Alamo archaeologist, I was like, yeah, this job is amazing. This is a dream job. So I applied and here I am.
I mean, that's like the dream job of any archaeologist, to work somewhere that people, equate to folklore or legend here in the United States, somewhere like Monticello or Mount Vernon, the Alamo. It's got an amazing story to it, and archaeology only adds to that story.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what's really cool for me is that all of my research interests prior, which were aimed towards the ancient Maya and pre-Columbia history in Mesoamerica, I was able to translate those theoretical interests to the Alamo. Concepts like social memory and thinking about how the past has shaped where we are today, and the stories we tell today.
Yeah,
So
and
it's really
that's one thing I think about when I do this show is how we reconceptualize archaeology at a place like the Alamo. Like, we actually have tangible evidence that either supports that story or changes the way we look at it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we have an entire team here at the Alamo that's dedicated to the history and the collections of the Alamo. So our archaeology is a real complement to our historians and our collections team and our curation team.
So let me ask you this: the Alamo is in downtown San Antonio, or populated area of San Antonio, does that make it difficult to do archaeological work when it's actually surrounded by like an actual urban area or city area?
Yes and no. If you look at a map of San Antonio or Bexar County, we're in that's the county that we are in. The Alamo itself is almost smack dab in the middle of the city. So the city grew up around the Alamo itself. So that creates some complications when you're doing urban archaeology, but it doesn't prevent archaeology. What's very special about San Antonio is that we have a very deep history here. So our archaeological history goes back, 12, 13,000 years ago. We have sites around Bexar County that, are very, very old. So we know this area has been home to people for a very long time. And the site of the Alamo is a central point here in San Antonio. So what we do, the types of complications that we often come across are more methodological. So for example, because the city has grown up around the Alamo, we encounter a lot of previous disturbance. So for example, we did some recent work in Alamo Plaza, and we were hoping to find any remnants of the original mission footprint or really any archaeological deposits. But instead, what we found was a lot of previous road construction and utility installation. So we didn't really find any intact archaeological deposits, but it still gave us some valuable data about what is and is not present.
So, from your perspective, what has changed about the Alamo since you've been the archaeologist there? Like, how has doing archaeological work changed the way you personally see the Alamo?
So we have some very exciting changes here at the site of the Alamo. We are growing our museum. We're growing the site footprint, trying to regain the original footprint of the mission from 1724, bringing this reverence to the site that not that it's not irreverent now, but we've had a lot of, as I mentioned before, of commercial properties that have grown up around the site. And at this point, we are trying to, make this a pedestrian friendly and visitor friendly site. So when they arrive at the Alamo, there's this sense of reverence for all of the activities that have occurred here over the past 300 years. And before I came to work at the Alamo, you don't really think about that. You see it at face value, and that's something often our visitors will come to the site and they look around and they're like, "This is it. Why did you put the Alamo next to this hotel or this convenience store?" Not realizing that those structures built up around the Alamo because of the importance of the site. And so it's really a special story to tell that, not only was the Alamo important 300 years ago, but it was important 200 years ago. It was important 100 years ago. It's important today because of the stories that we tell, because of the origins of the mission. Before it was the fort that we all think about associated with Texas independence, it was a Spanish colonial mission. And everything that has happened in the history of the Alamo, including what's happening today, is all interconnected. So that is something that you don't really think about until you're actually here and you're in the weeds and you're participating in those investigations every day.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people, have not necessarily an issue with, but they get bogged down in is the story of a place and not the reality of a place until they're actually setting foot in the place, realizing that it's more than just a story.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The Alamo, because of its rich history and its connection with San Antonio, I think holds a very special place in the hearts of Texans, but also it also contributes to, American culture and even beyond America. We have visitors from all over the world who come and they really connect to the events that occurred here.
So what you've talked a little bit about it. I know we've talked a little bit about it. What is the ongoing research that you're doing right now?
So the role of the Alamo archaeologist, my role is to ensure that all cultural resources, buried cultural resources here at the Alamo are protected and not negatively impacted by any construction. So we have a lot of, construction that's occurring on site, modifying of existing structures, new centers being built. We just had a new collection center built to house our museum collection. And what I do is I go out and I make sure that any construction that's going to occur is not going to negatively affect those archaeological deposits. So what that means is it's a lot of CRM mixed in with I guess archival research, and you're like I said before, really complementing the historians and the curators, and to save and preserve what we can archaeologically. So some of the work that we're doing and research questions are really tied into project specific construction. So right now, some of the big projects we have coming up are we're getting ready to break ground for a new education center. And what's really exciting about this education center is, for me, for the archaeologist, is that the site that we have selected for this education center actually at one point had remnants of an acequia. And so acequias are very important in the city of San Antonio. They were irrigation ditches, and they were very important for agriculture. It's how we got water throughout the city to everyone, living in San Antonio 300 years ago. So there was this acequia that was running right where we're putting this new building. Now, if it's still intact, that would be awesome to be able to see that. But we also know that there was construction done in the 1970s. And as anyone who is familiar with archaeology, they know that the 1970s may not have been the best time for archaeologists. So I'm not sure what remains of that acequia. I'm hoping there's still remnants and we can document it and then preserve it, because you remember that our history belongs to everyone and not just one person, not just one group. So it'd be fantastic if, in the process of, constructing this new education center, for me would be to be able to find any of those historic remnants of whether it's the acequia or any other type of structure. But that's one of our major projects we have coming up. Some other projects we have, one is with our historic long barrack. When people think of the Alamo, they always think of the church, which is, in our banner here, you can see the facade of our church, and they think that's all that is at the Alamo. Well, there's actually another historic structure called the long barrack. Originally, it was called the convento, and it actually predates the Alamo Church. And that was the first structure that was built on site. And because it's almost 300 years old, it needs some conservation work. And in conjunction with the conservation team, the archaeology team is going to do some excavations along the exterior of the long barrack. And what's really exciting about that is that there is a very good chance that we're going to encounter some prepared surfaces that date to, the Army period, which would be about the 1850s, 1860s. And then there's also a chance that we'll find surfaces that relate to the battle itself, which was 1836. And if we're very lucky, maybe even some of those original mission period surfaces. So those are two big projects that I have coming up really in the next 2 months. But it doesn't stop there. Archaeology at the Alamo is always happening. And I know we have projects, prepared for the next, couple of years.
I know this is kind of an obvious question, but has archaeology changed the way people see the Battle of the Alamo? I know that's probably a question you get a lot.
Well, a lot of the archaeology that has occurred has been in areas that there wasn't necessarily a lot of evidence of the battle. But we do have some archaeological evidence. In recent excavations in 2019, near the Long Barrack that I was just talking about, we have some artifacts that are specifically dated to the battle, and we dated those using stratigraphy and law of association, some of our favorite archaeology terms. And we have some artifacts that are directly related to the battle, as well as some features. So we have a trench that we are thinking could be related to the battle based on archival research and also the artifacts we found within the trench. In the 70s, there was other work done where they think they may have found fortification trenches. And then the lunette, which is a very characteristic of the battle itself as well. So archaeology is used in a way to complement the historians, to complement the archival documents. So it's very important for us to go out there to confirm like what we already know. And it's fantastic to say, oh yes, this is where the battle occurred. But it's even better to say we have actual tangible evidence of the battle, and we know that it happened in this area based on these artifacts.
Yeah, it gives substance to the narrative, so people find it more or more believable or less folklore, I guess.
Exactly. And I actually have some artifacts I can show you from the battle. So in recent excavations in 2019, we actually found, let's see if I can get it nice and close. We have this canister shot here. And if you'll note, it has this greenish tinge to it. So my metal experts out there will know that that indicates that it's a cuprous material, and meaning a copper or copper alloy. So who was using this type of material? It wasn't the defenders. It wasn't anyone that was fighting at the Alamo on the Texas side. Actually, it was the Mexican forces used this type of canister shot. And if you look, let's see if I can get it, be real close. You see how there's that flattened side?
Yeah.
Yep, that means this one, not only was it fired, it hit something. So this was found inside the church at the Alamo. So some direct evidence of the battle itself. So using artifacts in conjunction with context, we're able to tease out episodes of the battle.
So, question, if you find something that's directly connected to the Mexican army or Mexican occupation of the area, do you have to repatriate that to Mexico, or do you keep that on site at the Alamo?
So this will be on site, kept on site. We don't have to repatriate this to Mexico. I will say in Texas, whenever we are working under a permitted project, and all projects here, archaeology projects here at the Alamo are under a Texas Antiquities permit. Part of our permit is that at the end of field work, after artifact analysis, after the report has been written, we do curate all of our artifacts and in perpetuity, and those artifacts will go to a state certified curatorial repository. So whenever we are, we're still actually working on the report for this, that artifact is associated with. But once that report's finished, then all of that will be permanently curated in a facility.
So, about how many artifacts have you found as the archaeologist? I'm sure it's a lot.
It is a lot, and the types of artifacts also run the gamut of very exciting, like that canister shot, to very tiny. Here's a piece of Puebla blue on white. It's a type of ceramic, and it dates from 1775 to 1800. So we have tiny pieces like that. We have more modern artifacts like glass bottles. And this bottle itself, actually, I don't know if you can read the writing on it, but it's called Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, which was a female cure-all. You were supposed to drink this, and it would cure any problem a female might have. But it was also 40% alcohol, so that probably played a little part into the curative abilities. But this type of bottle and this medicine was popular in the early 1900s, and we found that on site. So a couple examples of the types of artifacts we find, and as far as a number, we're talking tens of thousands. There are a lot of artifacts, and you would think that even at a site as popular as the Alamo in downtown San Antonio, where there's been modern construction, there are still a lot of artifacts to be found, a lot of deposits to be found, archaeological features such as foundations, fortification trenches, acequias. There's still so much archaeology here on site, and it's important for me and for everyone here at the Alamo to make sure that all of these deposits and artifacts are taken care of and preserved in the best way that we can.
Yeah, and that brings up something that I like to talk about is the site-specific things like the acequia. I think I'm saying that correctly, and that's not something you see everywhere else. You see that when places that have dry spells and humidity issues like Texas and Arizona and places like that. You don't see that in other places.
Yeah, so the acequias were, a type of irrigation system. And you can look throughout the world and throughout history at different ways that people have harnessed natural water, like rivers, and used it to irrigate their crops to, keep their communities thriving.
And the trench you mentioned, I actually think I saw that on the Alamo's Instagram account a couple of weeks ago, maybe.
So a couple weeks ago, we were doing some backhoe trenching in the plaza, and that's where we encountered a lot of previous construction. So all of that was modern deposits. We didn't find any archaeological deposits during those investigations. But yeah, the trenching is a very common type of investigation that we do out here, just to test the area to make sure that any future work is not going to impact any archaeological remains.
So, what is your favorite artifact that you found so far? I know that's kind of a personal question.
So, my favorite, I have two. One is, and this is not going to be a very flashy answer, but I'll explain why it's my favorite. So here at the Alamo, we often call the church artifact number one. And it's one of the reasons, or it is the reason why we're all here. And one of my favorite encounterings as an archaeologist here at the Alamo is the foundations of the church. And in 2019 and 2020, we conducted several excavation units throughout the site, looking at walls, and we were essentially trying to figure out how the structures were built. And this was done to give to a conservation support team to figure out, how do we keep our historic structures standing? Because right now there's a lot of wall loss, and we want to make sure that these structures are standing for another 300 years. So archaeologists went in, and we were excavating along the walls to see how they were built, to look at the mortar, the stonework, the foundations. And that is, for me, one of the most exciting things that we found were these wall foundations, because there was a lot of differences, and even within the structure themselves, different walls looked like they were constructed maybe just a little bit differently or had different techniques. And it really brings in the people aspect. We talk about the past almost as if it's just the past, but we have to remember that there were people involved, and we can't take away agency from those communities that were here 300 years ago. So that's what's very exciting for me. And I love looking at the construction of these buildings. And there was actually at one point we could still see pick marks that were in the natural bedrock. So you could see where people were picking out to place those foundation stones. And that was, to me, that was just really amazing to see that people aspect of the past.
Yeah, and that's the fun thing about archaeology is it shows that people were there and we can prove that people were there and what they did on like a day-to-day basis, not like an hourly basis, because that would be ridiculous. But, on a day-to-day basis, we can see what they did, for work, for entertainment, for just in general.
Yeah, that's it's definitely one of my favorite things in archaeology, is looking at that people aspect. Another one of my favorite artifacts actually is a more recent artifact, and this was during monitoring work is actually outside of our Alamo site, but along the perimeter. And we encountered an old limestone foundation, and looking at archival maps, we could tie that old foundation to a boarding house and saloon that was present in about 1877. And within that context, I'm gonna grab it here, found this old pint bottle, a beer bottle, and then it's got a nice maker's mark. It says Paul Jones, 1905 on the bottom. So that boarding house and saloon started, we have it on archival maps, first showing up 1877, and then it stayed through the early 1900s. And we have not only pieces of the foundation, but we have someone's old beer bottle from that saloon. So I thought that was very exciting because you're able to put the artifact in the proper context, instead of having random artifacts that you find. Because as all archaeologists know, it's not about the artifacts, it's about the context. So that was really exciting to find that.
Yeah, and that's another fun thing, especially when you teach kids about archaeology, is you get to see the look on their face when they realize that we can find these things is because of how recent a trash collection system is here in the United States. Like when we use the term throw something out, they literally threw it out.
Right. Yeah, so it's pretty exciting. We also found some other exciting things. Whenever we were doing the mass excavation for the footprint of our new collection center, found a bottle cache. And I found it's about 29, 30 glass bottles complete, and no two were the same. So that was pretty exciting too. And that ties into, just what you're saying, is that throwing out our trash looks like everyone's just throwing all their bottles out. It's like, oh, that's the bottle throwing spot. And that's what we came across when we were doing excavations for the building footprint.
So it sounds like archaeological research is ongoing at the Alamo. What's the next step for you?
For me right now, we are preparing for construction of several new buildings, and also, and it's not just buildings, it's also landscaping here in Texas. If you're going to dig in the ground and you're on state property or city property, which that's, we would be on either of those, and you're going to be required to have a Texas Antiquities permit. So with all of these upcoming improvements to our grounds and the surrounding area, we will be having to do archaeological investigations prior to any other work, whether that's construction or, like I said, landscaping, utility relocation. So archaeologists get out here and we do proactive investigations. So we have that. For the next several years, I think I'm going to be very, very busy with field work. And then after the field work, we have even more, as you know, with archaeology, every but we say, 1 week in the field equals 3 weeks out of the field, because you still have all of your artifact analysis, and you have your report writing and your curation of your artifacts. So we have a lot of work planned for the next several years. Luckily, I'm not alone. I do have a team behind me, so which is very nice, because if I was digging it all by myself, oh gosh, we'd be here forever. But
You say that like it's a bad thing, though.
well, I do hope I am here forever. But yeah, we have several projects upcoming, and something that I like to incorporate into all of my archaeology projects here at the Alamo is to have some type of public outreach component. So one way that we do that is through our social media and our website. So whenever we have active archaeology, we do a weekly post, and that weekly post goes up on our Instagram, our Facebook, and also our Alamo website, which is thealamo.org. And you can check out, I do a narrative, and to write about what we found, what we did, and then also there's photos, so folks can see what we were doing. And if I find any extra exciting artifacts, then we like to do an artifact spotlight. So those are ways that people can stay engaged and check out what we're doing.
So, in conclusion for this incredibly awesome episode, by the way, what advice would you give to people if they wanted to learn more about the Alamo, Texas archaeology, or just archaeology in general?
If you want to learn more about the Alamo, I definitely recommend going to the website. There's not only do we talk about what's going on, with archaeology. It's a very, very good website. I'll tell you that. And there you can read about the history, the different time periods. So I would highly recommend checking that out. For Texas archaeology, I will, even though I'm not originally from Texas, I've been told I can claim it as my home now. And I will say that it's a fantastic place to do archaeology. Texas has quite a bit of a very deep cultural history. So it's a great place to be an archaeologist. And there's a lot of the universities here have fantastic archaeology programs. So if that's something that someone's interested in, start doing some research and find out, what are your particular interests, and then find like-minded people. And then once you find your group, then, you're able to really, do anything, right? So that would be my advice if you're interested in pursuing Texas archaeology and archaeology as a whole. Well, archaeologists, we all love our job, and we love other people who love archaeology. So if someone is really interested in pursuing a career, just start reaching out to people. I know it can be scary reaching out to a stranger, but we're all pretty nice. I'll speak for the whole group of archaeologists across the world. Generally, we're pretty nice, and we love what we do.
Eccentric but nice. We're an eccentric group of people, but we're very nice people.
That is true. That is very true. I think we are an interesting group of people, archaeologists as a whole. But I definitely recommend, attending, archaeology societies. The Alabama Archaeological Society. I know Texas has the same. We have a Texas Archaeological Society, and start doing a little bit of research. A lot of interest groups also have social medias, and different events. I know in October it's Texas Archaeology Month, and here at the Alamo we're going to be doing a few outreach programs to celebrate Texas Archaeology Month. But all the states have those, and it's really just taking the chance and reaching out to people and attending different events, because I think, like a lot of fields, it's kind of about who you know, and make those connections, and then we can get you to where you need to be.
Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much, and happy to be here.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on Archaeology After Dark today. Everybody take care and stay tuned for more.